Russia will no longer be able to return to Europe as a gas supplier. Europe has found a full replacement for Russian gas in an unexpected place in Africa. 3 African countries, Algeria, Niger, and Nigeria, have started building the large-scale Trans-Saharan gas pipeline project, which is expected to supply up to 30 billion cubic meters of natural gas to Europe each year. This project is considered one of the main elements of the European Union's efforts to diversify its energy supply in light of the rejection of Russian gas. And importantly, this is no longer just a discussion. The countries have started implementing the project directly on the ground. This means that globally, Europe really does not consider the option of returning to Russian gas even after the war in Ukraine is over. In this episode, we'll talk with you not only about the news of a new gas pipeline being built. We will discuss how Russia, for decades, simply oppressed Africa itself so that, God forbid, gas from Africa would not go to Europe. And it created all the conditions so that Europe would not look toward Africa as an option for gas supplies from there either. And I'll just give a little spoiler. This gas pipeline, which they have actually started building now, was already planned back in the 1970s. But Russia managed to block gas supplies from there to Europe all this time. I'm Alexei Pichi, let's discuss this topic. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, write any comment, and subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. The link is in this video's description. So today it became known that Nigeria, Niger, and Algeria are advancing the construction of a gas pipeline over 4,000 kilometers long, which will be able to supply up to 30 billion cubic meters of natural gas to Europe annually. This project is supposed to be an alternative to Russian energy resources, which Europe no longer wants to buy. It is reported that construction has already begun in Algeria, and in Nigeria, work on their section is expected to start next year. This marks progress in the implementation of one of the largest energy projects in Africa. The goal of this pipeline is to transport Nigerian gas through Niger to Algeria, where it will connect with existing infrastructure to reach European markets. There, essentially from Algeria, the gas will then go to Italy, Spain, Portugal, and generally throughout the Mediterranean region. Essentially, the construction of the Algerian section of the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline is a continuation of a long-term plan to transport Nigerian gas through Niger to European markets. If previously this project was held back by Russia, now there are no obstacles. And interestingly, Russia had spent years destabilizing African countries, so that they simply would not have the opportunity to develop their potential and could not offer their gas to Europe. And during this time, Russia itself was building more and more gas pipelines to that very Europe. It was a cunning plan to become a monopolist in supplying energy resources to the European market. But after the start of the full-scale war against Ukraine, this scheme collapsed, and a bit later we will discuss this scheme in more detail. Now, the idea is that Africa is finally starting to develop its own energy infrastructure, which will pass through Nigeria and Niger, and then connect to Algeria's extensive pipeline and export network. The pipeline is planned to be 4,128 kilometers long, starting from the city of Warri in southern Nigeria, then passing through the entire territory of Niger, all the way to the Hassi-R'Mel gas hub in Algeria. And it is expected that from there, 30 billion cubic meters of gas will be sent to Europe every year. Basically, from Hassi-R'Mel, the gas can be transported through the existing Algerian network to Mediterranean export terminals and pipelines that serve European markets. This project will provide Nigeria with an additional route to European markets, complementing its existing seaborne liquefied natural gas exports. It will also strengthen Niger's role as a transit country and enhance Algeria's position as a major supplier to Europe. So this will become the largest African hub for gas supplies to Europe. It's important to note here that Algeria already provides about 12% of the European Union's gas imports, which allows it to have the infrastructure to transport Nigerian gas to the European market. Interest in this project increased after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, and this invasion pushed Europe to look for alternative supply sources. And here it's important to understand how the timing lines up. The European Union plans to end its dependence on Russian gas by the end of 2027. At the same time, Imports of liquefied natural gas should be stopped by the end of 2026, and imports of pipeline gas by the end of September 2027. And now for the most interesting part. The completion of this pipeline is expected to coincide with this timing. So, in fact, Europe tried at least to plan it so that gas from Africa would start flowing at the moment when they completely give up Russian gas. But what's also important is that in the European Union's decision, there's a little clause, separated by a comma. What is it? Yes, they want to end gas supplies from Russia by this period. But if the situation arises that the African gas pipeline is not ready yet, they can continue transporting gas from Russia for one more month, then another month, and another. Basically, until the African pipeline is finished. But that's not all. The thing is, the Trans-Saharan project is now facing competition from the proposed Nigeria-Morocco pipeline. This is another major infrastructure project designed to transport that same Nigerian gas to Europe. Unlike the shorter route through the Sahara, this Nigeria-Morocco pipeline will follow the Atlantic coast, connecting several West African countries before reaching Morocco and then going on to Europe. So, we already have two major gas projects like this from Africa to Europe. And now the most important part. The idea of the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline has existed since the 1970s, but the project has constantly been delayed. It has been postponed for several reasons, and here are the reasons. You might be surprised, or maybe not. The first reason is cheap Russian gas. For decades, Europe, especially Germany, relied on long-term contracts with the Russian Federation. Economically, African projects seemed riskier and more expensive compared to the already established Russian infrastructure. Well, they thought there's a pipeline there, so why turn to Africa? And the second reason is that until February 2022, energy security was viewed through the lens of price, not geopolitics. And Russia allowed them to save money, gave discounts, got them hooked on a monopoly, and so on. Europe had no incentive to invest billions of dollars in some complex gas infrastructure in the Sahara. And most importantly, the constant instability in Nigeria and northern Nigeria made the project too risky for private investors. So there were always some wars, conflicts, and so on, and private investors were like, damn, maybe it's not worth investing billions there, building a gas pipeline, because there's always a war going on. And now remember, who for years has been fueling the destabilization of the situation in Nigeria and northern Nigeria? That's right, Moscow. Russia has long used a strategy of soft and hard containment of its competitors. The strengthening of the Russian Federation's military influence in the Sahel region, which includes Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, has created zones of instability. And so, when coups occur in Niger, military regimes and juntas that are somehow oriented toward Moscow constantly come to power, Western investors leave, and energy projects there are constantly frozen. Moreover, this has been attempted several times. Moreover, Russia has actively offered African countries alternative cooperation projects through Gazprom, Rosatom, Rosneft, and so on, promising technology in exchange for refusing integration with European networks. The goal was to prevent the emergence of an alternative supplier on the European market, and the saddest part is that for years Russia succeeded in this. But the most cynical part of this Russian strategy is this. For years, Russia promoted information narratives about Europe's neocolonialism, which turned local elites against long-term energy deals with the EU. But everyone still remembers those African protests against French neocolonialism. Remember those rallies and protests, saying let's kick the French out, let the Russians come in, we'll work with the Russians. That's what all of this was for. That's why the implementation of the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline is a sign that Europe has finally moved from words to action when it comes to energy independence. The start of construction in Algeria and Niger's plans for next year show that the fear of energy blackmail has outweighed the fears of investment risks in Africa. For Europe, this is a chance to finally break away from Russia, and for Africa, it's a chance to become a key investor, a player in the global energy market. Just imagine what will happen to Africa if it actually replaces Russia as the main gas supplier to Europe. And importantly, these projects have finally started to be implemented. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.